My name is Claire Voss, and I'm 33 years old. 6 years ago, my sister told my parents I had been quietly thrown out of medical school for academic dishonesty. None of it was true. None of it. But that single fabricated paragraph delivered to my mother over the phone on a Sunday night cost me my entire family. They stopped taking my calls. They returned my letters. They were not at my white coat ceremony, not at my residency graduation, not at my wedding. For 6 years, I was nobody's daughter. And then, 6 weeks ago, my sister was wheeled through the ambulance bay of my hospital at 1 a.m, unconscious, hemorrhaging, with a blood pressure that would not register on the cuff. The on-call trauma surgeon for that shift was me. When my mother saw the name embroidered on the white coat coming through the trauma bay doors, she sat down on the floor of the waiting room. She did not faint. She just lost the use of her legs. Before we get into the rest of this, take a moment and tap that like button and subscribe if this is your first time here. Tell me in the comments what city you're listening from tonight, because I love knowing where these stories travel. Now let me take you back. Back to a kitchen in Albany, New York, in the early summer of 2018, and the only afternoon of my childhood when my father looked at me the way I had spent 18 years waiting to be looked at. There were 2 daughters in the Voss household, but you only ever needed to know about one of them. My sister Lillian is 4 years older than me. She came into the world already knowing how to perform. By the time she was 8, she had been cast as the lead in a community Christmas pageant. By the time she was 12, she was the kind of girl who got invited to other people's family vacations because the parents liked her better than their own kids. She was tall, sun-streaked, easy in her body, easy with adults, easy with attention. And she walked through our house like she owned the deed. My parents adored her. My father, Harold Voss, a regional sales director for a hospital supply company, valued precisely 2 things in this world: people who showed well in public and people who never embarrassed him. Lillian was the first. Lillian was the second. My mother, Linda, a part-time office manager at a dental practice, deferred to my father on almost every parenting decision they ever made together, including the unspoken one that the family already had its star and did not need another. I was the other one. The bookish one. The one who, at family gatherings, would slip away from the dinner table during dessert and read in whatever upstairs bedroom seemed quietest. I wasn't unhappy. I wasn't even particularly aware of being overlooked. You can't miss what you've never had. When you grow up as the second child of a family that has already cast its lead, you don't experience the absence of attention as a wound. You experience it as weather. It is just the climate you live in. You wear a sweater, you move on. There is a small memory I keep returning to because it tells you everything in 2 minutes. When I was 11, I won the regional spelling bee. Not the school one, not the district one, the regional. I was the only kid from Albany County in the top 5. The ceremony was on a Saturday afternoon in May. Same Saturday, Lillian had a dance recital. My parents went to the recital. My father picked me up from the spelling bee an hour after the awards portion ended, in the parking lot of the auditorium, where I had been sitting alone on a low brick wall holding a small silver-plated trophy and a manila envelope with my certificate inside. I remember he did not get out of the car. I remember he leaned across the passenger seat and said, "Hop in, kiddo." Lillian was a knockout. I put the trophy in my lap and the certificate on the floor mat, and I closed the door. And that was the end of any conversation about the spelling bee. The trophy sat on my dresser for 3 years. Nobody in our house ever asked me what word I had won on. The word, by the way, was acquiesce. I have thought about that for a long time. I told myself, through middle school and high school, that I didn't need their attention. I told myself I had bigger plans. I poured myself into AP classes. I joined the Science Olympiad team. I volunteered at the Cancer Center on Saturdays from the time I was 15 because it was the only place I had ever stood where adults looked at me when I was talking and answered my questions like they mattered. By the time I was a senior, I was running on the unspoken theory that if I could not be the daughter they noticed, I would be the daughter they could not ignore. And for one brief afternoon, in the summer after I graduated high school, I almost succeeded. The letter came on a Wednesday in early June. I had applied to 7 medical schools. I had been accepted to 4. The thickest envelope, the one I had been afraid to open, was from the University of Washington School of Medicine in Seattle. Full tuition scholarship. 3,000 miles from Albany. My father read the acceptance letter at the kitchen table on a Wednesday evening with the windows open and the smell of cut grass drifting in. He read it twice. Then he set it down on the placemat and he looked up at me. And he said the words I had spent 18 years waiting to hear. He said, "Claire, I am proud of you." I have replayed those words 1,000 times. I have replayed the exact angle of his head when he said them. I have replayed the look in his eyes, which was something like surprise, mixed with something like recalculation, as if he were seeing me for the first time and trying to place me in a category he hadn't known existed. My mother called my aunt and my grandmother that night to share the news. She used a tone of voice I had never heard her direct at me before. Pride. Open, unself-conscious pride. For about 3 hours, on a Wednesday evening in June, I was the daughter my parents had not realized they had. And across the table from me, sipping a glass of wine and smiling with only the lower half of her face, my sister was already doing math. Lillian was 22 then, a year out of college, working as a junior communications associate at a public relations firm in Midtown Manhattan. She had a roommate she didn't like, a boyfriend she didn't really like either, and a job she found, in her own words, beneath her. Lillian had always assumed she would be the one whose career broke the family into a higher tax bracket. She had assumed her name would be the one announced at the country club. She had not factored in that the quiet one with the books, the one who never spoke up at Thanksgiving, might be on her way to becoming a doctor at a university across the country, while she was answering emails for a vice president in a midtown office building. I did not see her recalculating that night. I saw a sister who came over and hugged me and said, "I always knew you were going to do something amazing." I believed her. I would believe her for almost another 5 years. She started calling me more often. That was the first thing. In the weeks before I left for Seattle, Lillian, who had never called me without a reason in the entire span of my conscious life, began checking in. 2 or 3 times a week. Long, leisurely conversations on her lunch break. What was my schedule going to look like? What were the names of my roommates? What was the program structured like? What were my professors named? She asked about my anatomy lab partner, my study group, my apartment manager, the building I lived in, the coffee shop downstairs where I went on Sunday mornings to read for the week ahead. She remembered every name I gave her. She would bring them up 2 phone calls later. "How is Yvonne doing? How is your friend from the orthopedic rotation? How is the woman at the coffee shop?" I thought my sister was, at long last, getting to know me. I thought medical school had opened a door between us that had been closed since childhood. I thought, naively, that being accomplished had finally made me visible. I was, of course, handing her a map of the room. Every name was a future witness she would never need to call. Every detail was a hook she could later twist. She was building a profile of my life in Seattle that she could weaponize at a moment of her choosing. And I, exhausted and grateful and finally feeling like I had a sister, signed every page of it. The third year of medical school is where it all came apart. By then, I had become close, very close, with a woman in my class named Yvonne Cross. Yvonne had grown up in the foster system in northern Idaho. She had no family in any direction. Her parents had both died of overdoses by the time she was 9, and she had bounced between 4 placements before aging out at 18 and putting herself through undergrad on a combination of grants and waitressing tips. She was the smartest person in our cohort and the kindest. She was the only person I had ever met who, when I told her about my family at a midnight study session during anatomy block first year, did not say anything at all. She just nodded, made a small, thoughtful sound, and then handed me a flashcard and said, "Quiz me on the brachial plexus." She knew, the way only people without families know, that there is a particular pain that does not benefit from being commented on. We had been roommates since the spring of first year. In the August before our third year began, Yvonne started losing weight. By September, she was bloated and exhausted. By the second week of October, she was in the emergency room at our teaching hospital with what the gynecologic oncologist on call called extensive abdominal ascites of unknown origin. By the third week of October, she had a diagnosis: stage 4 ovarian cancer. Median survival, the oncologist said, was somewhere between 12 and 18 months. He said it gently. He had clearly said it many times before. I sat in my dean's office the next morning and explained the situation. Yvonne had no family. She had named me in her hospital paperwork as her emergency contact and her medical proxy. She had no one else. I asked for a formal leave of absence to be her caregiver through whatever the next year became. The dean, a man named Dr. Krishnamurthy, who had been at the school for 31 years, looked at me for a long moment over his reading glasses. He said, "Miss Voss, this will not be held against you. You take whatever time you need. Your seat will be here when you come back." He had me sign 3 pieces of paperwork. He had the registrar stamp them. He gave me a copy. He told me to call him directly if anything changed. He walked me to the door of his office and shook my hand. I have thought about that handshake more times than I can count in the years since, because it was, on a number of levels, the last entirely uncomplicated act of kindness I would experience for a long time. I moved into the spare bedroom of Yvonne's apartment that weekend. I drove her to chemotherapy every Tuesday morning. I held a plastic basin under her chin during the rough afternoons that followed. I held her hand in the oncology ward at 3 a.m. when the pain broke through the dilaudid. I learned, in those months, the difference between caring for someone who is sick and caring for someone who is dying. They are not the same job. The second one asks for everything you have. Somewhere in the first week of November, I called Lillian. I am not sure why I called her, even now. I think I needed to tell someone in my family that something terrible was happening, and Lillian had been the only one in my family acting like family for the previous 2 years. I told her about Yvonne. I told her about the leave of absence. I told her I would be back in the spring, after Yvonne either recovered or did not. Lillian was, on that phone call, perfect. She was warm. She was sympathetic. She asked the right questions in the right order. She said, "Claire, take all the time you need. I am so sorry. Don't worry about Mom and Dad. I won't tell them. They'd just worry. Focus on Yvonne." 48 hours later, she called our parents. I do not know what exact words she used. I would not learn the full architecture of what she had constructed until almost 6 years later, in a hospital room, with our aunt holding a phone in trembling hands. But the impact arrived in my life that same evening, at 11:42 p.m. Pacific Time. I was sitting in a plastic recliner next to Yvonne's hospital bed. She had been admitted that afternoon for dehydration. My phone lit up on the windowsill. It was my father. My father, Harold Voss, had not called me unprompted in over 14 months. I answered. His voice on the other end was not angry. It was something worse. It was clinical. He said, "Claire, your sister has just told us everything. The expulsion, the boyfriend, the drugs, all of it. We are not going to do this for one more minute. Do not call this house again until you are ready to tell us the truth." I stood up from the recliner. I walked into the hallway where my voice would not carry to Yvonne. I said, "Dad, I don't know what she told you, but none of that is true. I am on a leave of absence. I filed paperwork. I am taking care of a friend who is dying. I can send you the documents tonight. I can give you the dean's direct phone number. I can give you the name of her oncologist. Please, please listen." He said, "Lillian said you would say exactly this." He said, "Lillian said you would have a story prepared." My mother got on the line. She was crying. She said, "Claire, how could you? How could you lie to us? How could you do this to your father? How could you do this to me?" I said, "Mom, I am standing in a hospital. Please, just let me send you the leave of absence form. It is 1 PDF. It will take 3 minutes. She said, "I don't want to see any more pieces of paper from you, Claire. I want a daughter who tells the truth." The line went dead. I stood in that hospital corridor for a long time. I do not remember walking back into Yvonne's room. I do not remember sitting down. I do remember, at some point that night, my phone lighting up with a text from Lillian. It said, and I will quote it because the exact wording is burned into me, "I am so sorry, Claire Bear. I couldn't carry the secret anymore. I love you. Please get help." She had signed it with a small heart. She had used my childhood nickname, the one she had not used since I was 7, because she knew it would land in our parents' iCloud-backed message thread, and that they would, at some point in the days that followed, scroll up and read it. That message did not just lie about me. It performed concern. It put her on the record, and it locked me out. What followed over the next 8 days was the most determined and fruitless effort of my life. I called my father 17 times. The first 6 went to voicemail. The 7th, his number had been blocked. My mother blocked me the day after that. I sent 4 emails. The third was 12 paragraphs long. I attached the PDF of my leave of absence form, signed and stamped. I attached a letter from Dean Krishnamurthy. I attached a photograph of Yvonne in the hospital bed. None of them got a response. I learned later that my father had set up an email filter that sent anything from my address directly to a folder he called discard. He showed it to me, eventually, with a kind of slow horror, when we sat across a kitchen table 6 years later. He said he did not know, in the moment, why he had chosen the word discard. He had typed it in without thinking. It had felt, he said, like an action item. I wrote a handwritten letter. I mailed it priority from a UPS store in Seattle. It came back the following Tuesday. The envelope was unopened. My mother's handwriting was on the front in blue ballpoint. Return to sender, no longer at this address. We had grown up in that house. They had lived there for 24 years. I called my Aunt Cora, my father's younger sister, the only person in my extended family who had, throughout my entire childhood, treated me as if Lillian and I existed on the same plane of importance. Aunt Cora called my father that night. He hung up on her in under a minute. She called me back, her voice low and shaking. She said, "Claire Bug, he told me to mind my own business. He said you had finally pulled the rug out from under them." She said, "Honey, I will fight this, but you need to know it is not going to be quick." It was not going to be anything. Not for 6 years. On the 8th day, I stopped calling. I stopped writing. Not because I had given up on them, because I had finally understood that what had happened was not a misunderstanding. The misunderstanding was the thing that had been required to crack open a decision they had been waiting 25 years to make. Lillian had not invented their willingness to disbelieve me. She had only handed them a pretext. They took it because it was easier than the alternative. The alternative was admitting that the quiet daughter had been telling the truth about her own life for 25 years, and that nobody had been listening. Yvonne died on the morning of December 19th. It was a Wednesday. The light coming through the window of her hospice room was the gray, thin, mineral light that Western Washington gives you in December. She had not been conscious for almost 2 days. The monitor was silenced because she had asked, weeks earlier, that no one in the room have to listen to that sound. I was holding her left hand. The nurse on shift was a woman named Pauline, who had been with us for almost 6 weeks. Pauline saw Yvonne stop breathing before I did. She did not say anything. She just put a hand on my shoulder. We sat together for almost 40 minutes before either of us called anyone. There was no one to call. I organized a funeral. 8 people came. 2 former foster sisters Yvonne had stayed in touch with from her group home days. 4 of our medical school classmates. Dean Krishnamurthy, Pauline. I stood at the front of a small, non-denominational chapel and read a eulogy I had written at 3 a.m. the night before, sitting on the bathroom floor of Yvonne's apartment because it was the only room that did not still smell like her shampoo. I did not cry while I read it. I had no more crying available to me. I had been spending it for months. That night, I sat on the floor of Yvonne's bedroom, our bedroom, surrounded by her things, none of which I had any legal right to, and all of which I had been given by a piece of paper in a notarized envelope in the kitchen drawer. Her apartment lease was paid through June. She had set that up the previous summer, before any of us knew what was inside her. She had paid her own funeral expenses, in advance, in cash, through a small mortuary in Tacoma that she had visited alone in August. She had left me a letter on the dresser. I have it framed now, in my office at the hospital. It says, "Claire, there is more inside you than this family ever let you show. Go back. Finish. Become the doctor I will not get to be. And if you ever feel like you want to quit because of those people back in Albany, I want you to remember, blood doesn't make a family. Showing up does. I showed up. So did you. That is enough. That is the whole game." I read that letter 16 times that night. By the 17th time, the sun was up. I opened my laptop and I filled out the re-enrollment paperwork. I sent it in at 7:14 in the morning. I went back to school in January. I had no money. I had no family. I had a 1-bedroom apartment I could not afford and a leftover bottle of anti-nausea medication from Yvonne's last hospitalization that I kept in the back of my refrigerator because I could not bring myself to throw it away. I took out additional loans. I picked up a research assistant position in the trauma surgery lab on weekends. I ate the leftover sandwiches from grand rounds, and I stopped buying coffee anywhere except the cafeteria, where it was free for residents, even though I was not a resident yet. I graduated. Nobody from Albany came. Aunt Cora flew out for the ceremony and sat in the third row of the auditorium and clapped harder than any other person in the building when my name was called. She gave me, after the ceremony, a silver pen that she said had been my grandmother's, and that my grandmother had told her, in confidence, before she died, that she wanted me to have when I finished. My grandmother had died during my second year. I had not been told about the funeral until 11 days after it happened. Aunt Cora had called from her car in the cemetery parking lot, crying, to tell me. My parents had decided, by mutual agreement, not to inform me because they were not sure where I was emotionally. I matched into surgical residency at St. Lawrence Medical Center, a Level 1 trauma center in upstate New York, 90 miles from Albany. I had picked it deliberately. I had wanted to live, eventually, within driving distance of the family that did not want me. Not because I expected reconciliation, because I refused to be exiled. They were not going to push me out of my own region of the country. That was the line I had drawn for myself, alone in Yvonne's apartment in the days after the funeral. I would build a life on my own terms, in my own state, and I would not give them the satisfaction of having driven me away. In my second year of residency, I met Dr. Helen Bardsley. She was 61 years old at the time, the longtime chief of trauma surgery at St. Lawrence, and one of the founding board members of the New York State trauma system. She was sharp, dryly funny, and built, as my husband would later say, like a steel post wrapped in a cardigan. She took one look at me in the trauma bay during my first rotation, watched me run a code on a teenage gunshot victim, and on the way out of the room said to me, "Voss, you are very good and you are very angry. I am going to teach you how to keep one and lose the other." She was, for the next decade and counting, the closest thing I would have to a parent. In my third year, I met Aaron Brennan, a public defender in his early 30s, working out of the same county where I was on call most weekends. We met because one of my patients, a domestic violence survivor, had been his client in a different matter, and he had come to the hospital to check on her, and the nurses had pointed at me as the surgeon of record. He came up to me in the cafeteria with a paper cup of coffee in each hand and said, "I bought one of these for you. I don't know how you take it. I figured I would let you decide whether you wanted the cream and sugar in advance or after the fact." I took the one without. We were married 14 months later. I told him my whole story on the third date. He listened all the way through. He did not interrupt me once. He did not look pitying. He did not look surprised. When I was done, he set his glass down and said only, "Your family didn't deserve you. The good news is, the people who do are going to find you." That was, more or less, the moment. The wedding was at Helen Bardsley's house in October, in her backyard, under a tent we rented because there was a small chance of rain. Aaron's father walked me down a path between 2 rows of folding chairs. 28 guests. Aunt Cora was there. My grandmother, who had died, was there in spirit. My parents were not there. I had mailed them an invitation 6 weeks before. It had come back unopened. Aaron's father, a quiet, retired pharmacist named Gerald, had said when I called to tell him about the wedding plans and asked, hesitantly, if he would do the honor of walking me down the aisle, "Claire, I would consider it the second greatest honor of my life. The first being raising the man you are about to marry." I had had to put the phone down for a minute after that. Helen, after the ceremony, handed me a small sealed envelope. She said, "Don't open this tonight. Don't open it for a while, in fact. You'll know when." I tucked it into a drawer in my home office, and I did not look at it again for almost 3 years. The years passed. I built a life that I had constructed brick by brick with my bare hands, and that no one in Albany had any idea existed. Aaron and I bought a small house with a wide front porch and a Japanese maple in the yard. We got a dog, a black Labrador we named Galen, who slept across the foot of our bed and snored. I made chief resident. I made fellow. I made attending. 2 years ago, when Helen Bardsley retired from her chief position, she walked into my office at the hospital, closed the door behind her, sat down in the chair across from my desk, and said, "Voss, the board is offering me a retirement gift. I have been allowed to pick my successor. I picked you. Don't make me regret it." I was 31 years old. I became the chief of trauma surgery at St. Lawrence Medical Center 6 weeks later, the youngest in the history of the hospital. The envelope Helen had given me at the wedding turned out to contain a letter of recommendation she had pre-written 3 years in advance in the event that the chief position ever opened up. She had been planning this since the night of my wedding. She had not told me. I want to pause here for a moment. If you have ever been in a family where one person's lie was louder than your truth, where the people who were supposed to know you the best chose to believe the worst, drop a fire emoji in the comments. And if you have a feeling about where this story is going, type the word reckoning. Because what happened next is the part where the architecture my sister built over 6 years finally met the load it could not hold. Aunt Cora had been feeding me information about my family, carefully and reluctantly, over the years. She did not volunteer. I had told her, early on, that I did not want updates, but she would every so often mention something in passing, and over time, I built up a picture. My parents were healthy. They were still in the house in Albany. My father had retired. My mother had taken up gardening with what Aunt Cora described as alarming intensity. Lillian had married a man named Gregory in a wedding to which I had not been invited, and that I learned about, indirectly, 2 years after the fact. Gregory had then divorced her 3 years into the marriage, citing reasons that Aunt Cora hinted at but did not elaborate. Lillian had moved out of Manhattan, had taken a job at a luxury real estate firm in Westchester County, had been doing, in my aunt's careful phrasing, fine, for now. And then, in late November of last year, Aunt Cora called me with a different sound in her voice. She said, "Claire Bug, I need to tell you something about your sister. Something I think you should know." She had been carrying it for almost a year. 2 Thanksgivings earlier, she had finally confronted Lillian at the family table in front of my parents with the documentation she had been quietly collecting about my career. Lillian had looked at the documentation, my Aunt Cora told me, and had laughed, a small, short laugh, and had said, in front of our father, "Cora, you are getting old. The internet is full of people who have similar names. That isn't her." And my father had, in front of 7 family members, told my aunt that she was no longer welcome at his Thanksgiving table if she was going to continue this campaign of harassment. My aunt had left the dinner. She had driven home in tears. She had not gone back the next year. She had not told me any of this until now. She said, "Claire, I need you to understand. Lillian has not stopped. She has been telling people for years things that are not true. I have heard her, with my own ears, tell our cousin Diana that you are in and out of rehab. I have heard her tell your grandmother, before your grandmother died, that you had refused to come visit her in hospice. I have heard her tell people at Christmas that she has tried, repeatedly, to reach out to you, and that you have rebuffed her. None of it is true. I know none of it is true. And I have been trying to tell your parents this for years, and they have made a choice not to hear me. I have to tell you now, because I think something has changed. I asked her what had changed. She said, "Last week I was at your mother's house for tea. Your mother went upstairs to look for something. I went into your father's study to find a phone charger. There was a file on his desk. It was a manila folder. It had your name on it." She paused. She said, "Claire." Inside the folder were printouts of your bio from the hospital website, your photograph, articles about you, the press release about your appointment to chief. Your father has been collecting these. He has been keeping them. He just hasn't told anyone. She said, "I don't know what to make of that, but I wanted you to know." I did not know what to make of it either. I did not have time to figure out what to make of it, because 2.5 weeks later, at 1:07 in the morning on a Tuesday in January, my pager went off. I had been asleep for 1 hour and 10 minutes. Aaron stirred beside me. Galen lifted his head from the foot of the bed. The pager screen glowed. Level 1 trauma activation, single vehicle MVC, restrained driver, female, mid-30s, blunt abdominal trauma, GCS dropping, hemodynamically unstable. ETA 7 minutes. I was dressed in 3 minutes. I was in the car in 5. The roads were salt-streaked and empty. I called the trauma bay from the car as I drove. The charge nurse, a woman named Renata I had worked with for years, said, "She's coming in hot, Chief. We're set up in Bay 1. I said, "Page Patel and Singh for backup. Tell Patel I want him scrubbed in case I need him." I did not yet know why I was asking for backup. Some part of me, the part that has spent a decade running toward emergencies, must have noticed something in the dispatcher's tone. I ran through the case in my head as I drove. Mechanism of injury, restrained driver, blunt abdominal trauma, dropping consciousness, falling pressure. Likely splenic injury, possible liver involvement, possible mesenteric tear. Standard playbook. I had done this surgery hundreds of times. I walked into the trauma bay at 1:14 a.m. The team was assembling. The patient's chart had been uploaded to the workstation at the head of the bay. I picked up the tablet to read the demographics and confirm the working diagnosis. Patient name, the screen said. Lillian Voss Hatcher. Date of birth, August 11th, 1989. Next of kin listed, Harold Voss, father. Address, the same house in Albany where I had grown up. I do not remember setting the tablet down. I do remember very clearly looking up at the ceiling tile directly above the workstation and counting the small black dots on it for what was probably no more than 2 seconds and felt like a full minute. I have learned to do this on the rare occasions when something in my chest threatens to interrupt my hands. I stood very still. I counted the dots. I waited until the dots were just dots again. And then I turned to Renata and I said, "Renata, I need to disclose a conflict of interest. The patient is my sister. I have not spoken to her in 6 years. I am going to operate because I believe I am the best person in this building tonight to do so. But I want Patel in the room, and I want every step of this documented. If at any point I am not the right person, you tell me, and I will step out." Renata, who had known about my family situation in only the most general way, nodded once and said, "Understood, Chief. Patel is on his way." She did not say another word. She is one of the people the world has not given enough credit to. The ambulance pulled into the bay at 1:17. 2 paramedics rolled my sister out. She was strapped to the board. Her face was swollen on the left side from where it had hit something. Her left arm was splinted. Her shirt had been cut down the middle, and a large purple area was spreading across her right lower quadrant. The paramedic at her head said, "Pressure has been bottoming. We've been pushing fluids. She lost consciousness twice on the way in." I said, "Thank you, let's move." And behind that ambulance, running, were my parents. My father was in a winter coat thrown over what was clearly his pajama shirt. My mother was in a long quilted housecoat. She had on one slipper and one shoe. Her hair was wild. They had clearly been called by police at the scene, had gotten in the car, and had followed the ambulance for almost 40 miles down the interstate at 1 in the morning. My father reached the triage station first. He said, "That is our daughter. Where are they taking her? I want to speak to the doctor. Get me the chief of surgery." Renata, who had not yet seen my parents and had no reason to know who they were, said, "Sir, the chief is the trauma surgeon on tonight. She is already with your daughter. We will need you to wait in the surgical family lounge. Someone will come find you the moment we have an update." My father, who is 6'1" and has spent his entire life having his volume taken seriously, leaned over the counter. He said, "I want to see the doctor in charge. Now." Renata stood up. She said, "Sir, I understand. The doctor in charge is in surgery. You are not going to see her right now. What I can do is take you to the surgical family lounge. What I cannot do is take you anywhere near the operating room." My father opened his mouth to keep arguing. My mother, behind him, put a hand on his elbow. She said, very quietly, "Harold, please, just sit down." I learned later that this was the first time in their 40-year marriage that she had used that tone on him in public. He sat down. He sat down in the family lounge, on a vinyl chair, in his pajama shirt, and he held my mother's hand. And they waited. In the scrub room, I gave myself the only 30 seconds I would allow myself. I turned the water on hot. I scrubbed my hands and forearms from the fingertips up, the way I had done it 10,000 times. I looked at myself in the polished steel mirror above the sink. I looked at the woman in the mirror. I said, in my head, the only words that needed saying. The woman on the table is the patient. The people in the lounge are the family. You are not, tonight, anybody's daughter or anybody's sister. You are the surgeon. Operate. 3 hours and 26 minutes. That is how long it took to repair what the steering column and the icy embankment had torn open inside my sister. Splenic rupture, complete. We removed the spleen. Grade 2 liver laceration, repaired in layers. 2 small mesenteric vessels that had been torn loose, clamped and tied off. A small bowel contusion that we watched and decided to leave alone. Active bleeding, controlled. Vitals, stabilized. Blood products, 4 units of packed red cells, 2 of plasma, 1 of platelets. At 4:43 in the morning, I placed the last layer of closing sutures. Dr. Patel, who had been in the room beside me the entire time, who had not had to say a single word because there had not been a single moment where he was needed, pulled his mask down. He said, "Claire, that was a clean case. You want me to update the family?" I peeled my gloves off. I dropped them in the bin. I said, "No, Sanjay. I'll do it." He looked at me for a long moment. He said, "Take a minute first." I said, "I will." He left. I stood alone in the scrub room for a full 60 seconds. I did not cry. I checked my badge. I straightened my scrub top. I took one deep breath, and then I pushed open the doors and I walked down the corridor toward the family lounge. The corridor between the operating suite and the surgical family lounge at St. Lawrence is about 30 yards long. It is lined on one side with a wall of glass that overlooks a small interior courtyard. At 5 in the morning in January, with the snow falling outside and the recessed lights humming overhead, that corridor is the longest walk in the building. I pushed open the door to the family lounge. The lounge is a square room with rows of upholstered chairs and a television in one corner that is always playing CNN at a low volume. There were 2 other families in the room. Both looked up when I walked in. I scanned the room. In the back left corner, by the vending machine, my parents were sitting next to each other. My father had his head in his hands. My mother was staring at the carpet. I said, "Mr. and Mrs. Voss?" They both looked up. The instant my father saw me, in scrubs, with my badge clipped to my collar, his entire face went still. He stood up halfway and then sat back down, because his knees, I think, did not commit to either direction. My mother stood up. She did not move forward. She just stood up, one hand braced on the back of the chair behind her. Her mouth opened. No sound came out. I said, in the voice I have used 1,000 times for 1,000 other families, "I'm Dr. Voss. I'm the chief of trauma surgery here. I was the operating surgeon on your daughter's case tonight. Lillian sustained a ruptured spleen, a moderate liver laceration, and 2 torn mesenteric vessels. The surgery went well. She is stable. She is in the intensive care unit. You will be able to see her in about 90 minutes after she is settled and her vitals are checked." I paused. I said, "Do you have any questions about the surgery itself?" My father did not look away from my badge. He said, "Claire." I said, "Mr. Voss, do you have any questions about the surgery itself?" I had used his last name. I had used it the way you use the last name of a stranger. I watched it land. I watched it cut. My mother sat back down in her chair. She put her hands over her face. She made a small, high sound that was not quite crying. Behind me, through the glass partition that separates the lounge from the corridor, I could see Renata watching. I could see 2 other nurses watching. They had figured it out. The whole night shift had figured it out, somewhere in the last 3 hours. Word travels in a hospital faster than blood. My father said, "Lillian told us." He stopped. He started over. "Lillian told us, 6 years ago, that you had been thrown out of medical school. She told us. She said—" He could not finish the sentence. He was looking at my badge. He was looking at the embroidery on my coat. He was looking at the small St. Lawrence Medical Center crest stitched above the breast pocket. He was looking at all of it and trying to fit it into a worldview that had room for none of it. I said, "Mr. Voss, I am happy to discuss anything you would like to discuss, but not tonight and not in this room. Tonight, the only thing I need you to understand is that your daughter is alive and stable. The other conversation is going to be a long one. We do not have time for it now. I have other patients." My mother spoke for the first time. She said, "Claire, we tried to call you after. We tried." She stopped. She knew, even as she said it, that it was not true. Or it was true once, briefly, before they had stopped trying. She knew I knew. She said, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I did not say anything for a moment. There are responses that I had imagined myself giving for 6 years, in dark hours, when I had let myself imagine this conversation. None of them came to me. Instead, I said, very quietly, the only thing that was true. Mom, I sent you 14 things over 5 days. I sent you the leave of absence paperwork. I sent you my dean's phone number. I sent you a photograph of my friend in the hospital bed. I called 14 times. I asked Aunt Cora to talk to you. The last letter I sent you came back unopened, with your handwriting on the envelope. So when you say you tried to call me, after, I want you to take a minute and think about what after means. She did not respond. She could not. I turned to leave. As I turned, Renata pushed open the door from the corridor side. She had a clipboard in her hand. She'd clearly been waiting for the moment to seem appropriate. She said, "Dr. Voss, sorry to interrupt. The hospital president saw the overnight trauma census. He asked me to pass along his congratulations on the case tonight. Also, the awards committee for the Helen Bardsley Excellence in Trauma Surgery Award asked me to remind you that the announcement reception is next Friday. They want to make sure you can attend." She said it the way she would have said it on any other Tuesday morning. She did not know what she had just walked into. She had no idea that the award she had just named, after my mentor, with my parents sitting 15 feet away, was the final stone in a wall that the woman in the housecoat had spent 6 years pretending did not exist. My mother made the small, high sound again. My father stood up. He did not say anything. He just stood up, the way men of his generation stand up when they have lost something and do not know what to do with their bodies. I said, "Thank you, Renata. Tell the committee I will be there." I walked out. I did not see my sister again until the next morning. Lillian regained consciousness around 9:30 a.m. The ICU nurse paged me. I finished a chart note on another patient and walked over to the ICU. I went into her room alone. The lights were dim. The monitor was beeping softly. She was lying in the bed with her left arm in a splint and an oxygen cannula in her nose. Her hair was matted. She looked, in the dim light of the ICU, 10 years older than she was. Her eyes tracked me as I came in. They tracked my badge. They tracked back to my face. Her pupils, which had been almost relaxed, sharpened. I said, "Good morning, Lillian. I'm your attending surgeon. You were in a single-vehicle accident last night. You sustained a ruptured spleen, a liver laceration, and some additional injuries. We took you to the OR. You're going to make a full recovery. The next 24 to 48 hours are the most important. We're going to be watching your vitals closely. Do you have any pain right now?" She did not answer for almost 20 seconds. She just looked at me. I have, over my career, watched a lot of people figure out a lot of things in a lot of hospital beds. I have watched a man understand that his wife was not going to wake up. I have watched a teenager understand that he would never walk again. I have never, before or since, watched a face do what my sister's face did in those 20 seconds. It moved through several emotions at speeds I would not have thought a face could manage. Disbelief, recognition, calculation, fear. And then, settling onto her features like a coat she had been wearing her entire adult life and that no longer fit, the familiar expression of a woman trying to find an angle. She said, "Claire, I said, "Mrs. Voss Hatcher, you don't have to say anything to me right now. You're my patient. You are not, today, anything else. I am going to take care of you because I took an oath, and because that is what I do." You and I will have a conversation, when you are well enough, about the other thing. But that conversation does not happen in this room, and it does not happen until you are discharged. Do you understand?" She nodded. Once. A small nod. I checked her drains. I noted her output. I made a small adjustment to her morphine dose. I documented in her chart. And then I left. I did not stay for the rest of it. The rest of it was not for me. The rest of it, as I would learn from Renata an hour later, who heard it from the ICU nurse, was for my parents, who walked into Lillian's room at 10:14 a.m., and who, when my sister tried to begin her standard apology routine, with the standard tears and the standard voice and the standard repositioning of the narrative, were finally, not the audience she had counted on. My father, the ICU nurse later told Renata, had sat down in the chair next to my sister's bed and had said, very quietly, the first honest sentence I had ever heard attributed to him in my entire life. He had said, "Lillian, I am not asking you whether what your sister told us 6 years ago is true. I am telling you that I already know it is. I have known it for at least a year. I am asking you, right now, to tell me why." Lillian, the nurse said, did not cry. She did not produce any of her standard responses. She looked at our father, and then at our mother, and then she said only, "Because she was going to be everything I was not, and I needed her not to be." That was the entire answer. There was no second sentence after it. My father did not respond. My mother did not respond. They sat in the room for another 40 minutes, the nurse said, and nobody spoke. At one point, my mother stood up, walked to the bedside, and very gently smoothed my sister's hair away from her forehead. And then she walked out of the room and did not come back that day. Aunt Cora arrived at 11:30 with a small leather folder under her arm. I do not know how she knew to come. I think Renata may have called her. Renata is, as I have said, more thoughtful than the world has given her credit for. Aunt Cora walked into the ICU lounge, where my parents were sitting in 2 chairs that did not face each other, and she said, "I have been carrying this for 6 years. I am not carrying it anymore." She opened the leather folder. Inside were printouts of every email I had sent to my parents in the 8 days after Lillian's lie. There were screenshots of my call log showing the 17 attempts to my father's phone. There was a photocopy of the priority mail receipt for the letter that had been returned. There was the leave of absence paperwork, signed by Dean Krishnamurthy, time-stamped a full month before any of the events in Lillian's story. There was a copy of Yvonne's death certificate. There were photographs of my white coat ceremony, my residency graduation, my wedding. There was a typed letter from my husband's father describing what it had been like to walk a stranger's daughter down an aisle. And there was, at the very back of the folder, a single printed page that my aunt had been holding on to for almost 3 years. It was a screenshot of a text message that Lillian had sent to my aunt in the fall of the year I made attending. The screenshot showed the message in its entirety. It read, "Cora, please stop with the Claire updates. Mom and Dad are finally at peace. Don't blow it up just because you can't accept that the family moved on without her." Aunt Cora handed the folder to my mother. She said, "Linda, read it. Read all of it. Every page. I will sit here until you are done." And she sat down across from them, and my mother read every page. And at some point, my father got up and walked to the window of the lounge and stood with his back to the room. And Aunt Cora later told me that he stood there for almost 2 hours and did not turn around, and that my mother read every single page, and that when she got to the screenshot of Lillian's text message, she put the folder down on her knee and she said out loud to no one in particular, "I have given my entire life to the wrong daughter." I came back to the ICU floor that afternoon. My shift had ended hours earlier. I had not gone home. I had been in my office, finishing paperwork, drinking coffee I did not need. My parents were still in the lounge. The folder was on the small table between them. They both stood up when I came in. My mother said, "Claire, we are not asking for anything. I want to be clear. We are not here to ask anything of you. We just want you to know that we have read what your aunt brought. We know what we did, and we are sorry. And we know that the word sorry does not have weight here, but we wanted you to hear it from us." I said, "I appreciate that." My father said, "Claire, I would like, at some point, if you ever wanted, to talk. Just to talk. Not to ask for anything, not to negotiate. Just to talk." His voice did the thing voices do when they are being held together by a single thread. He said, "I missed your wedding. I missed your residency. I missed who you became. I missed who you have been the whole time. I want to be very clear that I understand what I did and what I did not do. I am not asking you to forgive me. I am asking you, if you ever want to consider letting me sit in a room with you. That is all." I said, "I will think about it." I did not promise more than that. I did not feel a flood of relief or warmth or any of the things you are supposed to feel in this moment. What I felt was something quieter and more useful. I felt, for the first time in 6 years, like the person in the room with the power. Not the power to punish, the power to decide. There is a difference. I had spent 6 years being decided about. Standing in that lounge, in scrubs, with my badge on, I was, for the first time, the one doing the deciding. That, more than anything else that happened that day, was the moment something shifted. I went home. Aaron was waiting. Galen was waiting. The house was warm. The Japanese maple outside the kitchen window was bare against the snow. Aaron poured me a glass of wine I did not drink. He sat with me on the couch and did not ask any questions for over an hour. When I finally started to talk, he listened the way he always listens, which is to say, the way Yvonne had once told me a real friend listens, which is with your whole face. 2 weeks later, Lillian was discharged from the hospital. I waited another month. I did not contact her. I did not contact my parents. I returned my mother's 2 messages with short, polite texts. I let everyone breathe. When I was ready, I emailed my sister and gave her the address of a small bakery in a town halfway between her apartment in Westchester and our house. I told her the meeting would be 1 hour. I told her Aaron would be sitting at a different table in the same room because that was a condition for me, not a punishment for her. She agreed. She did not push back. She arrived first. When I walked in, I almost did not recognize her. She had lost weight, the way you lose weight after surgery and then keep losing because something has gone out of you. She was wearing a sweater that did not fit her. Her hair was pulled back. She looked her age for the first time in my memory. I sat down across from her. I did not order anything. I said, "Lillian, we are going to do this now. We are going to do it once. I am not going to do it again. She nodded. I said, I want to know why. Not the easy answer you gave Dad in the ICU. The real answer. The whole thing. She took a long breath. She said, Claire, I had been the favorite my whole life. I had built my entire sense of who I was on being the one Mom and Dad loved more. When you got into medical school, I felt the floor start to slide. I felt it. I knew, instinctively, that if you became a doctor, the family was going to be reorganized around you. Not consciously. Mom and Dad would have never said it that way, but that's what was going to happen. And I could not survive it. I could not survive being second. So I called you to keep tabs on you. Not because I cared, because I was looking for a weakness. I was looking for a thing I could use. And when you told me about Yvonne and the leave of absence, I knew. I had it. I knew the moment you said it, what I was going to do with it. I called Mom and Dad 2 days later, and I told them you had been expelled, and I told them you had a boyfriend with a drug problem, and I told them you had been lying about it for months. And then I told them you would deny all of it, because I knew the next call you would make would be to them. I made the lie airtight. I made it preempt the truth. I did it on purpose. I have been protecting it for 6 years. I tried to sabotage your career 2 years ago. I called your old hospital, pretending to be a journalist. I asked about your disciplinary record. I called the Bar Association about your husband. I have done all of it, and I have not slept a full night in 6 years. I did not say anything for a while. When I did, all I said was, "Thank you for the honest version. That is the first true thing you have said to me in 15 years." She started to cry. Not the performance kind, the other kind. She said, "Claire, I am not asking for forgiveness. I am not even asking you to be in my life. I just need you to know that I know. I know what I did. I know who I have been. And the thing on the table in front of me, when I was in your hospital bed, was that you saved my life. After everything, you saved it. You did not have to." I said, "I took an oath. That was not for you." She said, "I know." I said, "Lillian, here is what is going to happen. You are going to write an email to our extended family, all of them. Aunt Cora has the list. You are going to tell them the truth. Every story you have planted, you are going to correct. Not partially, completely. You are going to take the rehab story off the table. You are going to take the abandoned her parents story off the table. You are going to take all of it off the table. In writing. Aunt Cora is going to confirm delivery. That is condition 1. She nodded. Condition 2. You and I are not going to be sisters in the way you imagine sisters might be after a thing like this. We may, eventually, be something else. We are not going to be friends. We are not going to call each other on birthdays. If you contact me, it will be for things that matter. I will respond when I want to respond. I am not going to pretend, and you are not going to pretend, that we have a relationship of the kind we never had to begin with. She nodded again. Condition 3. You are going to keep going to therapy. I do not need to know the details, but I will know, because Aunt Cora will know, and Aunt Cora will tell me only whether you are still going. You are going to stay in it. For years. Not months. Years. This is not a punishment. This is the only way I know to believe that the woman who did what you did is actually trying to become a different woman. She said, "Okay." I said, "That is what I have to say. Do you have anything you want to say?" She said, "Claire, I am sorry. For what it is worth, I am sorry." I said, "It is not worth much yet. It might be worth more later. We will see." I stood up. I left. Aaron stood up at the other table and followed me out. I did not cry on the drive home. I cried when I got into bed that night, briefly, and then I slept for 9 hours, which was the longest I had slept in months. My parents started counseling 6 weeks after the ICU. They did not tell me. Aunt Cora told me. They were seeing a therapist in Albany, twice a week. My mother took to it. My father, by Aunt Cora's account, sat through the first 3 sessions in near silence, the way men of his generation often do, and then, on the 4th session, something cracked. He had come home from that session, Aunt Cora said, and had gone into his study and had taken every printout from the manila folder marked Claire and had spread them all out across the desk, and had sat there for the rest of the afternoon, reading them in order. My mother had brought him tea at 5 o'clock. He had not looked up. He had said only, "Linda." I let her become a stranger. I am the one who did that. Not Lillian. Me. My mother, telling Aunt Cora later, had said it was the first time in their marriage he had taken sole ownership of a mistake without softening it. Lillian sent the email. 43 recipients. Aunt Cora confirmed delivery on every one. The email was 3 short paragraphs. It contained no qualifications and no self-pity. It said only that she had lied 6 years earlier about her sister's situation, that the lie had been deliberate, that she had maintained and expanded the lie for 6 years, that her sister Claire had never abandoned the family, that her sister Claire had been the one abandoned, and that anything anyone in the family had heard about Claire from her during those years should be considered fabricated. The responses, Aunt Cora reported, ranged from stunned silence to short 2-line emails that simply said, "Thank you for telling us. Claire, we are sorry." My grandmother's sister, Aunt Vivian, 86 years old, called me from her assisted living facility in Buffalo. She said, "Claire Bug, I am too old to undo this, but I want you to know I never believed it. Not really. I should have said so. I am saying so now." I told her there was nothing to forgive. I told her I loved her. I had not said those words to anyone in my extended family in 6 years. They were not as hard to say as I had thought they would be. The award ceremony was on a Friday night at the end of February. 300 people in a ballroom in Albany, of all places, 2 blocks from my old high school. I wore a navy dress. Aaron wore the suit he had worn to our wedding. Helen Bardsley was at our table. Aunt Cora was at our table. Dr. Patel and his wife were at our table. The Helen Bardsley Excellence in Trauma Surgery Award, which had been named after my mentor the previous year, was presented to its first recipient that evening. I walked to the stage. The applause was longer than I expected. I had prepared a speech. I had rewritten it 4 times. I said in the speech that 6 years earlier I had almost stopped, that I had sat in an apartment in Seattle after the death of a friend who had no family, with no family of my own willing to take a phone call. and that I had picked up a piece of paper from her dresser that had said in shaky handwriting that blood does not make a family, that showing up does. I said that the people who had shown up for me had built the surgeon who was standing on this stage. I named Helen Bardsley. I named Aaron. I named Aunt Cora. I named Yvonne by her full name on the record. I said that medicine, at its core, is a field defined by people who choose to show up for strangers, and that I had been lucky to find, in my professional family, the version of family I had once thought I would have to do without. And then I said, almost as an afterthought, that I had been asked recently to extend that same definition of showing up to people who had not, when it counted, shown up for me. That I was not sure yet what that would look like. That I was, however, willing to find out. And that for any of you in the audience who have been waiting for your families to see you, I had only one piece of advice. Stop waiting. Build the life that is yours. Build it in your own name. And when and if they ever turn around, let them find a door that you control, that you alone decide whether to open. I sat back down. Aaron held my hand under the table. Helen leaned over and said in my ear, "Voss, that is the second best speech I have ever heard you give." I said, "What was the first?" She said, "Your wedding vows." She squeezed my hand once and let go. In the very back row of the ballroom, in 2 chairs Aunt Cora had quietly arranged a week earlier without telling me, were my parents. They had asked through my aunt for permission to attend. I had said yes. I had said yes because the speech I gave was not going to be different whether they were in the room or not. And I wanted to be the kind of person who can give the same speech whether or not the people who hurt her are listening. My father, my aunt later told me, did not move during the entire speech. He sat with his hands flat on his thighs and his eyes on me. My mother cried quietly the whole time. When I sat back down, they stayed in their seats. They did not approach me at the reception. They had agreed, with my aunt, that the night was not for them. They left before the dessert course. My father had stopped in the lobby on his way out and had asked my aunt to pass along one message. He had said, "Tell her I came. And tell her she does not have to do anything with that." It is March now. The Japanese maple in the front yard has not yet leafed out. The snow has mostly melted. Aaron is in the kitchen making coffee. Galen is asleep across my feet. I am writing this in my home office, where the silver pen that belonged to my grandmother sits in a small dish on the desk, next to Yvonne's letter in its frame, and next to a third item that arrived in the mail 2 weeks ago. The third item is a photograph. It came in an envelope with no return address, but I recognize the handwriting. It is a photograph of me at age 11, sitting on the brick wall in the auditorium parking lot, holding the silver-plated spelling bee trophy. I had not known anyone had taken it. The photograph is slightly out of focus, taken from a distance, the way you take a photograph when you have not wanted to make the subject self-conscious. On the back, in my father's handwriting, it says, "Acquiesce. ACQUIESCE. I have been carrying this around in my wallet for 22 years. I should have told you. I am telling you now." There is no other text. There is no signature. I have not yet replied to it. I will. I have not decided in what form yet. Maybe a letter, maybe a phone call, maybe an invitation to sit for 1 hour in a coffee shop halfway between Albany and here, the way I sat with my sister. I have not decided. I have time. I have, for the first time in a very long time. If you have been watching this, and any of it has felt familiar, I want you to hear something before I let you go. The truth does not have an expiration date. It does not matter if it has been 5 days or 5 years or 20. The truth has a quiet patience to it. It waits. It is, often, the last thing in the room when everything else has worn itself out. And when it finally speaks, it does not need to be loud. It just needs to be the thing that is still standing. I did not get revenge on my sister. I never wanted revenge. I became a person who did not need it. I built a life that did not require their approval. I let the truth take its own time to arrive. And when it arrived in a trauma bay at 1 a.m, on the worst night of my sister's life, on the most ordinary night of mine. It arrived not because I had summoned it. It arrived because I had spent 6 years showing up, in scrubs, in operating rooms, at the bedsides of strangers, building the kind of life in which truth eventually has a place to land. If you are waiting for your family to see you, please, please do not wait. See yourself. Build the life that belongs to you. Pick the people who choose you back. And if, one day, the ones who did not choose you find their way back to the door of that life, do not throw the door open. Do not slam it shut. Stand at it. Look at them. And then decide. The decision is yours. It has always been yours. They just spent a very long time hoping you would not figure that out. My name is Dr. Claire Voss. I am 33 years old. I am the Chief of Trauma Surgery at St. Lawrence Medical Center. I am married to a man who chose me. I am the niece of a woman who never stopped fighting for me. I am the former student of a mentor who pre-wrote my recommendation 3 years before I needed it. And I am, slowly, carefully, on my own timeline, beginning to consider becoming, once again, somebody's daughter. Not the daughter they wanted, the daughter I actually am, which is, as it turns out, the only one I was ever willing to be. There is a photograph on my desk of a girl on a brick wall holding a silver trophy. The girl in that photograph did not know, when the picture was taken, that someone was looking. She thought she was alone. It turns out she was not. It just took 22 years for the person looking to say so. I am not yet sure what to do with that. But I have, finally, the rest of my life to figure it out.